Hey everyone, get ready to be spooked with bedtime scary stories set on rainy nights. The sound of raindrops and thunder will create the perfect, eerie ambiance. So, grab your blanket, get cozy, and close your eyes when you need to. Prepare for a night of goosebumps. It was a cold, rainy evening, and I was settling in for a quiet night at home. My name is Emily, and I live alone in a quaint, old house on the outskirts of town. The place had a charm, but it could get quite lonely. I was reading a book by the fireplace when the doorbell rang. Startled, I glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? I hesitated for a moment, then got up and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman standing there, drenched from the rain, holding an old, worn suitcase. I opened the door cautiously. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. She smiled warmly. "Emily, it's me, Aunt Margaret." My heart skipped a beat. Aunt Margaret? My mother's sister? I hadn't seen her in years, not since I was a child. She held up a photograph, showing a younger version of herself with my mother. It looked authentic, and the resemblance was undeniable. "I know it's been a long time, dear," she said, her voice soothing. "I was in the area and thought I'd visit. May I come in?" I hesitated, but then nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She looked tired and cold, and it felt wrong to turn her away. She smiled again and entered, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. We sat by the fireplace, and I made us some tea. Aunt Margaret began to share stories from the past, recounting memories of my mother and our family. There was something comforting about her presence, a sense of familiarity that made me feel safe. After a while, she reached into her suitcase and pulled out a small, ornate bottle filled with a dark liquid. "I brought you something special, Emily," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It's a family recipe, a potion for good health and long life. Your mother used to make it." I was intrigued. My mother had always been interested in herbal remedies and natural potions. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret," I said, taking the bottle. "But I don't think I've ever seen this one before." She smiled mysteriously. "It's very rare. Just a small sip before bed will do wonders." I hesitated, but her warm smile and the comforting stories had lowered my guard. I uncorked the bottle and took a small sip. The potion was bitter, with an odd metallic aftertaste. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and Aunt Margaret's face seemed to blur. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out, and I fell back onto the couch. The room began to spin, and my vision darkened. The last thing I saw was Aunt Margaret's smiling face before everything went black. When I woke up, the world around me had changed. I was no longer in my cozy living room. Instead, I found myself in a vast, desolate landscape. The sky was a sickly shade of green, and the air was thick with a foul, sulfuric odor. The ground was barren, cracked, and dry, stretching out endlessly in all directions. Panic set in as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. Where was I? How did I get here? I called out for help, but my voice seemed to vanish into the void, swallowed by the oppressive silence. As I wandered through the eerie landscape, I began to see shadowy figures in the distance. They moved slowly, aimlessly, their forms indistinct. I approached one, hoping for some kind of answer. But as I got closer, I realized with horror that these beings were not human. The creatures had the shape of humans, but their skin was ashen and lifeless. Their eyes were empty voids, devoid of any light or emotion. They moved with a slow, jerky gait, as if they were marionettes being controlled by unseen strings. One of them turned to face me, and I felt a chill run through my entire being. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. It reached out a skeletal hand, and I recoiled in fear. The touch of its fingers was ice cold, sending a wave of terror through me. I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven ground. The creature continued to advance, its empty eyes fixed on me. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. The landscape around me seemed to shift and change, as if it were alive, and I soon found myself lost in a maze of twisted, barren trees. I continued to run, desperate to escape the nightmare I had found myself in. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I could hear whispers in the air, ghostly voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was Aunt Margaret. Her warm smile was gone, replaced by a sinister, predatory grin. "Welcome to the Netherworld, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "You were so easy to deceive, just like your mother." I stared at her in shock and disbelief. "What are you talking about? Why are you doing this?" She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the clearing. "I am not your aunt, Emily. I am a servant of the dark, and I have brought you here to fulfill my master's wishes." I backed away, my mind racing. "What do you want from me?" She raised her hands, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. "Your soul, Emily. Your soul will feed the darkness and give it strength." I turned and ran, but the ground cracked and split beneath my feet. Dark, twisted roots emerged, trying to ensnare me. I dodged and weaved, barely managing to stay ahead of them. In my desperate flight, I spotted a faint light in the distance. It was the only thing in this dark, twisted world that seemed out of place. I headed toward it, hoping against hope that it would lead me to safety. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small, ancient-looking well. The whispers grew louder, and the air around me seemed to thrum with a dark energy. I reached the well and peered inside, seeing a shimmering portal at the bottom. With no other options, I climbed over the edge and lowered myself into the well. The walls were slimy and cold, and I could feel the darkness pressing in around me. As I reached the portal, a cold hand grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking at the hand, and it let go. With one last effort, I plunged into the portal, feeling a sensation of being pulled through time and space. I woke up in my living room, gasping for breath. The room was exactly as I had left it, the candles still burning, the potion bottle on the table. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of Aunt Margaret. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the potion? I didn't know what to believe. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and I heard whispers in the night. The experience had left me scarred, a constant reminder of the dark world I had glimpsed. I moved out of the house shortly after, hoping to leave the nightmares behind. But some nights, when I close my eyes, I still see those empty, soulless eyes staring back at me, and I wonder if I ever truly escaped. Months later, a new family moved into the house. They found the place charming, perfect for their needs. The little girl, Lily, was exploring the backyard when she found an old, ornate bottle buried in the dirt. Curious, she brought it inside to her mother. "Look, Mommy, I found a treasure." Her mother smiled and took the bottle, examining it closely. "That's lovely, dear. Why don't we put it on the mantelpiece?" That night, as Lily was getting ready for bed, she heard a soft, whispering voice. "Lily, come to the garden." She crept outside, drawn by the voice, and saw a figure standing by the well. It was a woman with a warm smile, holding out her hand. "Hello, Lily," the woman said. "I'm your Aunt Margaret." And the cycle began again. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. It was a cold winter evening when Rex, our loyal German shepherd, ran away. The storm had hit hard, rattling windows and howling through the trees. My family and I huddled inside, the power flickering, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Rex had always been a brave dog, but something about that night unsettled him. One moment he was with us, and the next he was gone, having slipped out through the cracked back door. We searched for days, combing the woods and putting up flyers, but Rex had vanished without a trace. My daughter, Lily, cried herself to sleep each night, clutching Rex's favorite toy. We all felt his absence deeply, the house emptier and quieter, without his playful barks and comforting presence. A year passed. Life moved on, though the wound of losing Rex never fully healed. Then, one warm summer evening, as we were sitting down for dinner, we heard a familiar scratching at the door. Lily sprang up, her face lighting up with hope. "Could it be?" she whispered. I opened the door, and there he was. Rex, standing on the porch, looking almost exactly as he had a year ago. His fur was matted and dirty, but his eyes still held that familiar spark. We were overjoyed, tears streaming down our faces as we embraced our long-lost friend. At first, everything seemed perfect. Rex appeared healthy, albeit a bit more reserved. Lily was ecstatic, spending every moment she could with him. But soon, small, unsettling changes began to emerge. Rex's behavior grew increasingly strange. He would sit and stare at nothing for hours, his eyes tracking something invisible. His once playful nature had turned almost predatory. He began to growl and snap at shadows, his eyes glowing eerily in the dark. The change was subtle at first, but gradually it became more pronounced. One night, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. "Daddy, sometimes Rex looks at me like he doesn't know me," she said, her voice trembling. I tried to reassure her, but deep down I felt the same unease. Rex's eyes, once filled with warmth and love, now seemed cold and calculating. One evening, while cleaning the attic, I found an old book tucked away in a dusty corner. It was an ancient tome on folklore and dark rituals, something I had inherited from my grandmother but never paid much attention to. As I flipped through its yellowed pages, I came across a chapter on demonic possession. The descriptions matched Rex's behavior eerily well. animals acting out of character, staring at invisible entities, growing more aggressive. A knot of fear twisted in my stomach as I read on. Could it be possible? Could something have happened to Rex during the year he was gone? The idea seemed absurd, but the evidence was mounting. My wife, Sarah, remained skeptical, but she couldn't deny that Rex was different. One night, as we were discussing our growing concerns, Rex began to bark furiously. His barks turned to snarls, and he threw himself at the back door, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. We rushed to the living room to find him standing over Lily, who was cowering in fear. Rex's growls filled the room, a sound more feral and menacing than any we had heard before. I stepped forward, trying to calm him, but he turned on me, teeth bared. In that moment, I knew we were in danger. I grabbed a nearby broom and used it to push him away from Lily. Rex snapped at it, his jaws closing around the wood with a sickening crunch. "Get Lily to her room," I shouted to Sarah. "Lock the door." Sarah scooped up Lily and ran upstairs. Rex followed them with his eyes, but I managed to hold his attention long enough for them to get to safety. The next day, I reached out to Father Michael, the local priest, who was known for his knowledge of the supernatural. He listened intently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks. "Your dog may have brought something back with him," Father Michael said gravely. "Something dark?" He agreed to come to our home that evening to perform a blessing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, Father Michael arrived with his prayer book and a vial of holy water. Rex was in the backyard, pacing restlessly. Father Michael began the blessing, chanting in Latin and sprinkling holy water around the house. As he approached Rex, the dog's growls grew louder, more menacing. When the holy water touched Rex, he let out a bone-chilling howl and backed away, his eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. It was as if the water had burned him. "This is no ordinary possession," Father Michael said, his face pale. "We need a full exorcism." Father Michael gathered his tools and prepared for the exorcism. Sarah, Lily, and I huddled in the living room, fear gripping our hearts. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The exorcism began with prayers and chants, Father Michael's voice steady and strong. Rex thrashed and snarled, his body contorting in unnatural ways. The room grew colder, and an oppressive presence filled the space. Suddenly, Rex lunged at Father Michael, his teeth bared. Father Michael stood his ground, holding up a crucifix. Rex froze, his body trembling. "By the power of Christ, I command you to leave this creature," Father Michael shouted. Rex let out a guttural scream, and the room seemed to tremble. An unseen force pushed us back, and for a moment I thought we might lose him. Then, with one final agonized howl, Rex collapsed. The room grew silent, the oppressive presence lifting. We watched in stunned silence as Rex slowly got to his feet, his eyes no longer glowing. He looked around, confused, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I thought we might lose him. Then, with one final, agonized howl, Rex collapsed. The room grew silent, the oppressive presence lifting. We watched in stunned silence as Rex slowly got to his feet, his eyes no longer glowing. He looked around, confused, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Rex was different after the exorcism, but in a good way. He was more like his old self, though a bit more subdued. The aggressive behavior stopped, and the eerie presence that had filled our home was gone. We kept a close eye on him, still wary of what had happened. Father Michael assured us that the entity had been banished, but the memory of those dark days lingered. Life gradually returned to normal, though the experience left its mark on all of us. We were more cautious, more aware of the unseen forces that could influence our lives. Months passed, and we began to feel a sense of peace. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Rex lay by the fireplace, his eyes half closed. Lily was drawing at the table, her face relaxed and happy. Suddenly, Rex lifted his head, his ears pricked. He let out a low growl, staring at the front door. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. We had hoped the terror was behind us, but something felt off. The doorbell rang, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I stood up and walked to the door, my heart pounding. As I opened it, I was met with a sight that froze my blood. Standing on the porch was a man, his eyes glowing with the same unholy light that Rex's had once held. He smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "Good evening," he said, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Behind him, shadows moved, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew cold, and I knew our ordeal was far from over. We fought to protect our family, but the dark presence persisted. Rex stayed by our side, a loyal guardian against the unseen forces. Father Michael continued to help, but the entity seemed stronger, more determined. The nights grew darker, and the shadows whispered secrets we couldn't comprehend. We realized that our battle with the demonic forces was just beginning, and the cost of our defiance was yet to be fully paid. In the quiet moments when the house was still, I could feel the eyes watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I knew that as long as we stood our ground, the darkness would never truly leave us. We've made it to the last story of the night. This final tale is the scariest one yet, guaranteed to give you chills. We were just looking for a bit of fun. That's what I keep telling myself. Just a group of friends, trying to scare each other for laughs. My name is Josh, and I'm a typical teenager in a small, boring town where nothing ever happens. Well, nothing used to happen. It was a chilly Friday night, and my friends and I were gathered in my basement. There was Matt, the ringleader of our little group, Sarah, who always acted tough but was secretly scared of everything, and Lisa, the skeptic who never believed in anything supernatural. We had been binge-watching horror movies, and Matt suggested we try something different, a planchette session. I had heard about planchette before. It's supposed to be a way to communicate with spirits using a board and a pointer. You ask questions and the pointer moves to spell out the answers. It sounded like a load of nonsense to me, but Matt was insistent. "Come on, Josh, don't be a wuss," he said, grinning as he pulled out a dusty old Ouija board from his backpack. "It'll be fun. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" We dimmed the lights and sat in a circle around the board. Matt lit a few candles, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Sarah was already looking uneasy, and Lisa rolled her eyes, but she still joined in. We each placed a finger on the planchette, and Matt began. "Is anyone there? Can you hear us?" For a moment, nothing happened. We all exchanged glances, feeling a bit foolish. Then, to my surprise, the planchette started to move. Slowly, it spelled out Y-E-S. Lisa laughed nervously. "Nice try, Matt. We know you're pushing it." But Matt shook his head, his expression serious. "I'm not doing anything. I swear." We continued asking questions, and the answers grew more unsettling. The spirit claimed to be someone named Ethan, who had died in our town years ago. The more we communicated, the colder the room seemed to get. Sarah shivered, pulling her hoodie tighter around her. Finally, Matt asked, "Do you have a message for us?" The planchette moved quickly, almost frantically. Josh. Everyone turned to look at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. "This isn't funny, Matt." "I'm not doing it," he insisted. "Josh, what does it want?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The planchette started moving again, faster this time. B-W-A-R-E. We ended the session abruptly, all of us feeling spooked. We tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere was tense. Sarah and Lisa left soon after, and Matt stayed a bit longer, trying to convince me it was all a prank. But he seemed genuinely rattled, too. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound, every shadow in my room seemed magnified. I kept thinking about the planchette, about the name it spelled out. My name. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a game, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging fear. The next day at school, things started to get strange. It began with small things. Books falling off shelves, lights flickering, my locker door swinging open on its own. My friends joked about it, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Then the dreams started. Every night, I dreamt of a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. I could never see its face, but I felt its presence, cold and menacing. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I told Matt about the dreams, but he brushed it off. "You're just psyching yourself out, Josh. It's all in your head." But I knew it wasn't. The dreams were too real, too vivid. And they were getting worse. One evening, as I was walking home from school, I felt like I was being followed. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was no one there, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I quickened my pace, my heart racing. When I got home, I found a note on my bed. It was written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. "Beware." I stared at it, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? I showed it to my mom, but she dismissed it as a prank. "Probably one of your friends messing with you," she said. But I knew it wasn't. I could feel it in my bones. Something was wrong. I started researching the name Ethan and found an old newspaper article about a boy named Ethan who had gone missing in our town decades ago. His body was never found, and the case remained unsolved. That night, the dream was different. The dark figure spoke to me. "You shouldn't have called me," it whispered in a voice that chilled me to the core. "Now you will pay." I woke up screaming, and my mom rushed into my room. She tried to comfort me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't believe me, but she knew something was wrong. I decided to confront Matt. I needed to know if he was behind all of this. When I found him at school, I pulled him aside and demanded answers. "Are you messing with me, Matt? Did you leave that note?" He looked genuinely confused. "What note?" "Josh, I told you I'm not doing anything." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out to get me. I started to avoid my friends, spending more time alone, trying to figure out what to do. One evening, as I was walking home, I felt the same sense of being followed. I broke into a run, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached my house, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trying to calm down. That's when I heard it, a soft, sinister whisper right next to my ear. "You can't escape me, Josh." The following days were a blur of fear and paranoia. Objects in my house started moving on their own. I'd find chairs overturned, pictures on the walls askew, and doors that I was sure I had closed standing wide open. My mom noticed too, but she tried to rationalize it. "Maybe we have a rodent problem," she suggested, though her voice was strained. The dreams became more intense. The dark figure no longer stood at the foot of my bed. Now, it would sit on the edge, leaning in close, its breath icy on my skin. It spoke of things I didn't understand, threats that made no sense but filled me with dread. One night, I woke up to find my room freezing cold. My breath fogged the air, and I could see my breath. The dark figure was there, closer than ever. "You can't hide," it whispered. "You belong to me now." Desperate, I reached out to my friends again. I told them everything about the dreams, the whispers, the note. Matt finally took me seriously. "We need to do something, Josh. We need to end this." We decided to visit an old woman who lived on the outskirts of town. She was known for her knowledge of the supernatural. People called her Madame Serena. We hoped she could help us. Madame Serena listened to our story with a grave expression. "You've summoned a restless spirit," she said, "and it has attached itself to you, Josh. You need to perform a cleansing ritual to break the connection." She gave us a list of items we needed: candles, salt, and a special herb called sage. We gathered everything and met at my house. Madame Serena instructed us on how to perform the ritual. We lit the candles and formed a circle around me, sprinkling salt at our feet. As we began chanting, I felt a cold wind whip through the room. The candles flickered, and the shadows seemed to dance on the walls. The dark figure appeared, more menacing than ever. "You can't banish me," it hissed. "I will never leave." We continued chanting, louder and more forceful. The air grew colder, and the figure shrieked in anger. Finally, with one last guttural scream, it vanished. The room grew silent, the oppressive weight lifting. I collapsed, exhausted but relieved. Madame Serena nodded approvingly. "It is done," she said. "But you must never dabble in the supernatural again. Some spirits are best left undisturbed." Life slowly returned to normal. The dreams stopped, and the strange occurrences ceased. My friends and I vowed never to speak of the planchette session again. We went back to our usual routines, trying to forget the terror we had unleashed. But deep down, I knew I would never be the same. The experience had changed me, left me wary of the unknown. I learned that some things are better left alone, and that curiosity can sometimes lead to unimaginable horrors. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows are long, I can still feel a presence, watching, waiting. A reminder that some doors once opened can never be fully closed.